Tonight, crisis after crisis, apology after apology. And now 3 Met police officers face allegations of gross misconduct over the strip search of a 15-year-old schoolgirl. We hear calls for the Met police to be radically reformed or abolished. Patsy Stevenson and Dania Al-Obeid were arrested at a vigil for murdered Sarah Everard. Today, they received payouts and an apology from the Met. Is that enough? And have the police learned anything? I've spoken to both women and will play you their emotional call for change. Keir Starmer's big gamble on migration, with closer ties to the EU and the prospect of more people coming to the UK. Will it show voters he's a pragmatic PM in waiting, or has he given the Conservatives their biggest campaigning weapon yet? Waiting lists in the NHS in England reach another record high, with 7.68 million people waiting for treatment. The Prime Minister announces more funding to help the health service get through the winter, but says it will be very hard to meet one of his central pledges. Is he right? All that and more with the former government advisor Salma Shah and James Schneider, a former advisor to Jeremy Corbyn, who are here to give their take for the next hour. It's Thursday, I'm Sophy Ridge, and this is the Politics Hub. Well, all that to come on the show, but I did just want to bring you some breaking news first from the United States, because President Biden's son, Hunter, has been indicted on federal firearms charges. We can go straight to our US correspondent, Mark Stone, who's in Washington for us. Mark, what can you tell us?
Another day, another remarkable moment for American politics, Sophie. Yes, Hunter Biden, the son of the US president, indicted in a 4-page legal document which has just been released. This is not entirely unexpected. It's related to gun charges, alleged gun misuse by Hunter Biden in terms of buying a weapon while being addicted to drugs back in 2018. He had thought he'd done a plea deal with the Justice Department a few months ago, a plea deal where he would plead guilty to these charges and also to charges of tax evasion, and that in return there would not be a jail term. That plea deal fell apart, and the consequence of that is that he has now been charged on 3 counts. 1, false statement in purchase of a firearm. The second, a false statement related to information required to be kept by firearms licensed dealers. And the third count, possession of a firearm by a person who is an unlawful user of or addicted to a controlled substance. In short, he bought firearms while knowingly being addicted to drugs. That is the charge, and we can assume that he will have to surrender himself to a police station or a court in Delaware in the days ahead as this process goes on. It's extraordinary in terms of the legal situation. It's extraordinary politically as well. And you can be sure that even though Hunter Biden has been wrapped up in an awful lot of controversy, which has caused his father a lot of problems, even though this indictment was to a certain extent expected, there would have been a hands-in-head moment in that building behind me.
Yeah, that almost certainly would have been. Mark, thank you very much indeed. Mark Stone there in Washington, where politics in America are always a complete roller coaster, and Mark keeping us across it there. Now, tonight on the programme, I want to talk about 2 women, Patsy Stevenson and Dania Al-Obeid. 2 strangers who went to a peaceful vigil on Clapham Common, and they wanted to light a candle in honour of a murdered woman, Sarah Everard, killed by a serving police officer. Instead, they were pushed to the ground, handcuffed and arrested. And the next day, they were covered in bruises. But the one thing they weren't was silenced, because today they've won a payout and an apology from the Met. Now, Patsy said something that's really stayed with me. She said, "I thought you would never be arrested unless you did something wrong." And I also want to talk, that really brings me to what happened to a 15-year-old girl, Child Q. Pulled out of class and strip searched while on her period. She was accused of having drugs, but she didn't. She didn't have drugs. She also had done nothing wrong. So on the programme tonight, I want to ask, what happens if you can't trust the police? Because the Met are claiming tonight that they're working every day to make London a city where women and girls can feel and be safe. and where communities can have trust and confidence in their police services. But in the very same breath in the statement, they also said that the actions of police at the protest were found to be appropriate. So forgive me if I find it quite hard to get my head around how a force that believes that those actions were appropriate can also be serious about winning back the trust of women and girls. Well, let me play you my interview now with both of those two women, with Dania and with Patsy. But just to say that there is some flash photography coming up in this. What do you make of the apology?
You know, we're at the point where it's unheard of, really, that the Met apologises or settles any case. So for that, we feel like, oh, that is a victory, and we'll take it. But, you know, we've been in negotiations for months because we weren't happy with the apology. There was no apology, really. I mean, they said their actions were appropriate that night.
Their actions were appropriate. I mean, it sounds like a typo, doesn't it? It sounds like you think, oh, they must be meaning inappropriate.
Oh, you mean inappropriate? No, they still stand by that. But meanwhile, they now recognise our motivations for going. In that sense, I feel seen and heard for our motivations because they've been questioned this whole time, so...
The language, though, you know, the letters that you received, I regret that your opportunity to express your grief and anger was curtailed by your arrest and removal. I mean, this is a violent sort of act we were talking about here, isn't it? I mean, the photo of you, the kind of iconic image of you being kind of pinned down by the police.
Yeah.
Do you feel that there's been a kind of reflection, a real reflection of what actually happened?
I think, you know, immediately after it happened, they really jumped on the media bandwagon. They just said a lot of things in the media that I don't think were true at all. You know, saying we were violent and we threw things like that. I didn't see any of that. All I saw was male and female police officers being violent and aggressive towards myself and others.
Let's talk a bit, shall we, about what happened on that evening. And I remember it so well myself. You know, it was kind of in the middle of COVID, wasn't it? The Sarah Everard murder, I think, struck so many women and girls so deeply. And I can completely understand the sort of impulse to go out and to make yourselves heard, to make your voices heard at that point. I mean, you'd never been to a protest before, had you?
Yeah, I'd really never done anything like that before. So, you know, it was a vigil. It was, you know, I feel a lot of people say it was a protest, but
yeah, it wasn't. It was a vigil.
Yeah.
It's actually an important distinction.
Yeah, but I think a lot of people just seem to think that a group of people started talking about things and chanting, and it wasn't like that. It was someone was peacefully saying, we shouldn't have to deal with this. This is not OK. We should be able to trust our police officers. And that's when they moved in, so.
What was your memory of that night?
Oh, wow. It's such a blur that night. But I remember really needing to go there and to stand with other women because there's a lot of... People dismiss what women go through and the abuse they go through, and the way they dismiss them is saying, well, you shouldn't have worn that, you shouldn't have done that. And it was a moment... I mean, people spoke about, oh, what, Sarah Everard was in a well-lit road and she was well-covered, and it was like they can no longer point fingers, and it was this moment, actually, it's never our fault. It's not our fault. So there was this feeling of really wanting to stand there and feel... I wanted to feel so validated in my experiences. But then the Met Police stood in front when there was some chanting against them, which we have every right to, because one of their officers murdered and raped an innocent woman. And from that moment, it was kind of like the experience of being silenced again. Don't you dare be angry. Express your grief, but limit it and make sure you don't speak about it. So it's a blur that night.
And at one point, you remember someone holding out their hand to you at the protest?
Yeah, so that's how it began, is that, you know, there's a lot of questioning. People like, but why did you go on the bandstand? Why this, why that? We've never been able to talk about it before. So me and Dania haven't shared our stories. When we did today, you know, my story is that I went to go and put the candle up at the front of at the bandstand edge where the flowers were, and a woman, you know, people were being manhandled, and a woman put out her arm and said, can you come up and help? And we moved the flowers away and got up. Today I found out that woman was Dania.
I mean, that's extraordinary.
Yeah.
It was a big moment for us to realise that, because...
You can give her a hug as well.
Yeah, I know, I was like, I didn't want to.
Oh, God.
Yeah,
It was a
so
huge
weird.
moment. I mean, I remember the women being heavily handled on the bandstand, and there was a split moment. If I join them, and then maybe it starts a bit of a trend, and we all in solidarity, maybe there's too many of us, we're standing against them, and they won't arrest us, and they will stop, they will leave us alone. It was kind of a dramatic moment, climbed over the bandstand and put my hand out, and Patsy was the only one that joined me. And then we wrapped our arms around each other to kind of protect ourselves from the arrest. But then obviously everyone got really heavily handled after that point. But we just realised today it was...
Yeah.
And amazing that you describe it as wrapping your arms around each other, protecting each other at the protest, and it feels like that is what you're doing now, taking on the Met together.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah, and but there's more women from that as well. You know, it wasn't just us. It was there were other people that were arrested. There were other women there that night who faced that assault from police officers. Like myself, I was covered in bruises by the end of it. You know, I know one of the women fractured her wrist, apparently. So do you know what I mean? It was heavy-handed. When I say heavy-handed, I mean aggressively so.
I read a quote for you, and we did discuss this before, when you said that it reminded you of your experience of domestic abuse. You don't have to talk about it at all if you don't want to. It's completely up to you. But if you did want to sort of explain a little bit more about what you meant by that, then you can do.
You know, around a decade ago, I almost lost my life to domestic abuse. And after the situation, after that happened, was even worse because I felt like I was being silenced and blamed, and the process to go through it with the police, there was no empathy and you're kind of left alone. And so I just became a shell of myself and I minimised myself. And so going to this vigil and trying to find my voice and stand with other women and express this grief, and then getting arrested and handled the way we did, it brought me back to that time of being silenced, and I was like, I couldn't do it. I didn't want to go ahead with the civil claim. I kind of shied away. It was only until they convicted me a year and a half later that the anger really, it was kind of...
They convicted you? This is the other thing that I can't quite get my head around. What happened there?
So a year and a half later, a journalist reached out and said, you know, how do you feel about being prosecuted by the Met Police? I was like, what? I didn't receive anything. And they were able to do that under the single justice procedure. A hearing went without me, without knowing it was for the COVID fine, but I received no communication. And it was, had it not been public and had we not had an incredible legal team of women that have really helped us through this process, I would have lost hope, to be honest with you. I'd be like, I've got a criminal record now. I don't know how to fight this. I don't know what I've done wrong. And it would have, you know, and if it wasn't public, you think maybe other people are experiencing this.
It's extraordinary. And I've interviewed you before, and something that you said then has really sort of stayed with me when you said, I thought you could never be arrested unless you had done something wrong. And I kind of feel that is such a big part of this story as well. You know, if you can't trust the police, then where does it leave you as a society?
Yeah, I think, you know, the main point that always needs to be amplified is that this has been happening to black and brown people for a long, long time. Police brutality, like, for ages. And, you know, that systemic racism that we've seen from the Casey report and other things that have come out. And I think, you know, what happened to us at the Vigil opened up other people's eyes to this could happen to other people as well, which it shouldn't have gone like that. You know, we should have been listening from the start. But even myself, I was ignorant towards it. Now we've got a chance where we're saying, look, it really is this bad. No one's exaggerating. And I hate that it's taken this as well to push for it. But I hope that people also recognise that as well as the misogyny, there's institutional racism, homophobia, ableism, the list goes on, and they're not fit for purpose.
I would, on some of the issues that you talk about there, I would actually quite like to get your reaction to news today about Child Q. Now, this, if you remember, is the 15-year-old girl who was pulled out of school. She was strip-searched while on her period. And the Met have today admitted overusing their power to strip-search children and admitted that this person was treated differently because she was a girl, but also because she was black. What's your sort of reaction to this story as well?
Every single time, even though there's been so many stories about police officers abusing, innocent people across the country, and it's not just the Met Police. Every time it's heartbreaking. It's just like, did they actually do that? And then you're like, oh, of course they did, because they've got these powers that they've been given, which only is getting stronger. There's new acts in place, and their vetting system is really poor, and they're letting in people, with past histories, and there's 1 in 5 police officers in the misconduct system, are abusive themselves. So is it really a surprise? It's awful to... It's a sobering moment to realise how bad this is. You're like, how did it get here?
Do you trust the Met Police Commissioner, Smart Rowley, to sort it out?
No. I think that he is better at talking than Cressida Dick was. I think that he's very good at giving lip service. He's very good at talking about things that he wants to change and, he's going to do this and going to do that. He doesn't... I don't think he cares, in my opinion. I did a video with Led by Donkeys that was put onto New Scotland Yard of every single time something like this happens, there's too much public pressure. It's like a pressure valve. There's too much, and they release it with, we've got a new commissioner. Don't worry, we'll reform. And they don't. Time and time again. It just resets the media, it resets public pressure, and it ends up being forgotten about. And that's what we cannot let happen again. Right now, we need to keep up the public pressure on the police. They need to absolutely radically reform the entire institution or abolish it, if I'm honest. I think I'm at that point. I never thought I'd say that I agree with abolishment, but it's looking like it's a good idea in my books.
What really sort of struck me when I was doing that interview is how normal Patsy and Dania are. They were nervous, they got emotional, they were desperate for a coffee afterwards because they had such a long day. And they don't have PR or press team, they organise the interviews themselves today. So they're like 2 really ordinary women who've done something quite extraordinary in taking on the Met Police. Well, let's bring in Salma and James, shall we, at this point. Is there a problem with the Met Police?
I think it's obvious that there's a problem with the Met Police, and that is evidenced by what we've just seen in that interview, numerous cases about use of powers, extension of the use of powers. I think the question now for policymakers, decision makers, and indeed the Met Police themselves is exactly what your interview ended on, which is what is that reform going to look like and when are we going to see some change? I think it's very difficult for politicians in this instance, having been in the Home Office.
Yeah,
the police have operational independence. The only politician that the Met is accountable to is the Office of the Mayor of London. And we saw that Sadiq had a set to with the previous commissioner and she departed, Cressida Dick. So we probably have to also understand where that accountability is going to sit as well, because rightly, politicians shouldn't be responsible for the police in terms of their operational day-to-day, but there has to be a better system of accountability and more transparency.
What's your take? I mean, we heard the Patsy saying that we should even look at abolishing the Met.
And there needs to be really radical change, whether that is you change the name of it and build a new institution, you call that abolishing a new, or you have radical reforms of the existing. And I think it's right that we need accountability, and that's not necessarily directly through police officers, but we should be looking at direct community accountability over how communities are policed. Because, what's so amazing about these 2 women is that they've actually been able to fight back.
Yeah.
And most are not able to, and most, you see lots of protests where the protesters are slandered by something that turns out to be completely untrue. For example, the year before, in 2020, there were protests in Bristol against the new police powers bill. And what was put out by the police after that was that police officers' bones were broken and a lung was punctured, and it presented that these protesters were thugs and hooligans. And then there's a quiet press release 4 days later saying, actually, there were no bones broken, there's no lung punctured. And they managed to reset the balance a little bit. And I think we should take the opportunity to say, the change has to be sufficiently dramatic that no no Met police, no police can say that their actions were appropriate at that vigil. I mean, I was there myself early. I wasn't there when the arrests were.
Yeah, because you went to the vigil yourself.
Yeah, I was there. I was living near, just down the road from where Sarah Everard was abducted, and I've been to a lot of protests. It's a very, I'd gone before the arrest, but it was very quiet, very calm. I mean, everyone was wearing masks. It's still the height of COVID. And the police's actions there are clearly not appropriate. And so you're going to have to see pretty wholesale change, I think.
It was it was a time, wasn't it? Like, I mean, I still remember it so clearly. The feeling around Sarah Everard, and then just seeing what was happening. I should obviously point out, that the police are saying that they had to balance allowing people to protest, but also the COVID restrictions at the time. But it was quite an emotional, shocking time.
But I think this is the thing. It wasn't the right to protest. It was a vigil that was quietly conducted. And I think that the use of force and the idea that something could happen is definitely sort of heightened in anxiety, but it didn't feel like that was going to happen in that situation. There were lots of protests around at the time of COVID. Black Lives Matter were protesting all the way through central London. And, there was, I can't remember if it was before or after the vigil, but, that was policed without, huge issues. So I think the fact that it was not a protest and it was not violent and not aggressive and it was quiet, I think also puts the Met on the back foot on this one.
I want to talk about Child Q as well. I know you should never sort of bring kind of anecdotes into discussions, but I was really struck when this guy kind of approached me, this was a few months ago, on the street, and he was like, talking about Sky, and he was saying it's really great, that we're talking about the way that women are treated in the Met, but can we also talk about how the black community is treated with the Met? And he was just talking about some of his experiences as a black guy growing up in London, how he was arrested for doing absolutely nothing, for trying to help someone in a fight, and that this was happening to his friends and his community all the time. And it is quite important that we look at this aspect as well.
Yeah, and this girl Q story is just so horrific. And you take one step back and think, why on earth are uniformed men strip searching school children full stop?
I think they may have been women in this case, but I think the point still stands about...
Uniform, very frightening, traumatising thing to happen. And, with powers that can be applied in a way that's very subjective, which is what you have with stop and search, all of the evidence suggests that they're done in extremely racialised ways. That is what happens. There's basically no evidence to suggest that isn't. And so we do have functionally racist policing. You'll hear those stories again and again and again because they're true.
I think the issue with this is that at some point, people are going to have to draw the line between issues that have arisen as a consequence of poor behaviour by the Met and the fundamental job that we all require the police to do. And, that thin blue line is dependent on trust. We've come up with this word constantly through these interviews. So, stop and search, it's an important tool in the policeman and women's arsenal because it is about sort of heightened knife crime, drugs, ensuring that they're actually being able to service the community. But the question of where that level is in terms of whether they can go beyond certain or use powers in a certain way is the difficult question. And without understanding how the culture of the Met has developed, I don't think we can actually work out how we're going to fix it, because we do need to find solutions to this, because lots of people in lots of communities do depend, probably less so given the way where crime numbers and things are, but they do depend on the police being able to do their job effectively.
Really interesting discussion on this. Thanks very much. I have to see if Samant Rowley can do what he says that he's setting about to do to try and rebuild some of that trust in the Met Police. Still to come on the Politics Hub tonight. Remember the Prime Minister's pledge to bring down NHS waiting lists? Well, we're going to find out how he's getting on.
I'm Mark Stone and I'm Sky's correspondent based here in Washington, D.C.
Our street! Our street!
Well, the plan seems to be to head to the police station where the policeman who fired the shots was based.
And everything you know, his memories is all gone.
In almost every corner, this town has been completely destroyed by the fire. I've witnessed the remarkable passion for politics here, but the anger too.
We have to get Trump out of the White House.
Is this the moment to reform gun laws?
You know, it's easy to go to politics.
But it's important. It's at the heart of the issue.
I get that that's where the media likes to go.
Well, it's not. It's where many of the people we've talked to here like to go.
I report on the biggest stories from around the world.
This is a town that is effectively encircled by the Russians. You say it's all fabrication, what's happening in Bucha?
Destroyed my nation.
We take you to the heart of stories that shape our planet.
I can hear now quite a few explosions in the distance here in Jerusalem. A very violent series of confrontations here. What do you think of ISIS?
Everybody here knows the truth of ISIS.
The 5 of us have made it out of the car.
Welcome to Backstage, the film and TV podcast.
Hello and welcome back to the Politics Hub. We are your source for all of the day's political news and analysis. Now, this show shares a name with our digital Politics Hub, which I'm in front of right now on this kind of giant screen, and you can catch up with it anytime on your phone or computer. So we can have a look at some of today's highlights. And this is the first one. Boris Johnson, he's been relatively restrained in his newspaper column since leaving office. Not sure the Mail got exactly what they paid for, but this latest article in The Spectator is a bit more punchy because he says the government should stop dragging its feet and send more weapons to Ukraine. And he says if they don't, they risk a potentially catastrophic victory by President Putin. Now, also on the Hub, there was a bit of good news for the Prime Minister today because the Parliamentary Standards Committee has decided that Rishi Sunak won't be sanctioned for an inadvertent breach of confidentiality rules. This is about his failure to declare his wife's shares in a childcare firm. Also on the Hub, HS2. I'm not sure there's ever been more hand-wringing about the future of a railway line, but today Downing Street refused to guarantee the high-speed railway will run to Manchester as planned, with reports that Rishi Sunak and Jeremy Hunt are considering scrapping the project's second stage. And finally, we've got another set of record waiting lists for the NHS in England today, so it is a good opportunity for us to look at our 5 Pledge live tracker. So we're kind of keeping tabs on how his performance is. And this tab, there we go, on cutting NHS waiting lists and times, and see how he's getting on. They make pretty dismal viewing tonight. That line is not going in the direction the Prime Minister hopes. He said today that it would be very hard to meet his promise. Now, we promised you that we'll keep monitoring the PM's performance on the 5 pledges, so we can now go to our health correspondent, Ashish Joshi, and watch him doing just that.
The waiting list for elective care has reached a new record of almost 7.7 million. It means the list has grown every month since the Prime Minister's pledge in January to reduce waiting lists by next year. One of the reasons is because the health service is struggling to increase the number of elective surgeries to pre-pandemic levels. The current pace remains well below targets for the next 2 years. Both NHS leaders and the government have said industrial action is behind the slow progress. There is better news for Rishi Sunak, though. Among long-term waits, the number of people waiting more than 2 years has fallen from 314 down to 277, as they aim to eliminate this number completely. And the median wait for treatment is down to 11.3 weeks, the lowest it's been since December. The Prime Minister says the government's initiatives are working.
We're rolling out 5,000 more beds across the NHS. That's on track. Rolling out 800 more ambulances. That's on track. And we're rolling out virtual wards, which are new innovations that doctors have created that allow patients to be treated at home with technology, getting them home quicker, freeing up capacity in hospitals. All those things are really delivering for patients.
But the big test for these initiatives won't come until the winter. We do know the NHS has recorded its busiest summer with 6.5 million attendances in A&E across June, July and August. And that raises concerns over what it could mean for ambulance handover times in the months ahead. It took ambulances in August an average of almost 32 minutes to respond to Category 2 incidents such as heart attacks and strokes. While that is an improvement on this time last year, it is more than 10 minutes longer than pre-pandemic response times. The government has provided NHS trusts with £200 million to help tackle the coming winter. But industrial action among health workers has so far cost an estimated £1 billion. So there are questions being asked over how much the new funding will make a real difference. And the most disruptive strikes are still likely yet to come. Junior doctors and consultants will stage joint action together for the first time next week.
Coming up on the Politics Hub, Keir Starmer's gone on the offensive today. He says he'll smash the people smuggling gangs, but has he fallen into a Tory trap? Hello, welcome back. You're watching the Politics Hub. A bit of breaking news to bring you from Libya. Our correspondent Alex Crawford's been reporting on the devastating flooding that it's been seeing in Libya, and we do have an updated number of people who've died in that flooding, because the death toll following the flooding in Libya's coastal city of Dania has now soared to 11,300. That's over 11,000 people now, and that is according to the Libyan Red Crescent. We'll continue, of course, reporting on the impact of that flooding in Libya, but for now, back to the UK politics, because Keir Starmer has faced a lot of criticism in recent months, including on this show, for not saying enough, for being too safe. But today, the Labour leader set out his vision for a change in the UK's migration policy. Risky, because small boats and migration is exactly what the government wants to be talking about. So is this a sign of confidence for a Labour Party happy to take on the Conservatives on their territory, or are they walking into a Conservative trap? Well, our Deputy Political Editor, Sam Coates, joins us now. What do you make of this, Sam?
Well, Keir Starmer is sort of launching a series of plans on the world stage. He's in The Hague, Netherlands, today, making points about migration. And then he travels to Canada, to Montreal, for a progressive conference with leaders like Justin Trudeau. And then the big one is next Wednesday, when he goes and sees President Macron in the Élysée Palace. Unusual, I think, for the French president to see an opposition leader. And this is all because he's trying to make an important moment. He is setting out his foreign policy and his security policy. And as such, I think it's an important moment for him. Let's hear what he had to say.
How do you stop the boats? More than 23,000 migrants have crossed the Channel so far this year. This is a humanitarian and a political crisis.
There's 58,000 spaces in.
Keir Starmer wants to show he can succeed where the government has not. Meeting officials at Europol with a plan he says can turn the tide.
The government has lost control of our borders, and we can see that with the number of crossings there are across the Channel in small boats. We have to stop that. And I think the only way to stop that is to smash the gangs that are running this vile trade.
A new cross-border police unit to track smugglers, and a security agreement with the EU to allow real-time intelligence sharing. Tough language too. A pledge to treat smugglers like terrorists by freezing their assets. And the government's flagship policy of sending failed asylum seekers to Rwanda would be scrapped.
We have officers on the ground in France working in quite close cooperation with French authorities, certainly, and also in other EU member states. So I think at this point, there's a lack of clarity about what's new about this.
The Prime Minister has made stopping the boats a central campaign promise. Now the Starmer plan is a chance to put clear blue water between the parties. The Labour leader wants a deal with the EU to return migrants after they land in the UK. He admits that could mean accepting a quota of asylum seekers in exchange.
I think the mask slipped today. We saw what would happen if there was a Labour government, and that is that they would wave in tens of thousands of illegal migrants from a place of safety in Europe.
The Labour leader taking a political risk on the world stage. He'll know soon enough if it's paid off.
So I think all of this matters, Sophie. On migration, he is shifting the emphasis away from deterrence, which he just doesn't think works, and closer to a sort of approach of cooperation, which he hopes will do. But there's a bigger point here, I think, and that's about his pose towards the European Union. Keir Starmer today is saying things about the trade-offs, perhaps some of the unpalatable truths about striking deals with the EU, in this case that you might have to take migrants in if you want to do a deal with them. He is gambling that that approach will make him look like the grown-up in the room. Now, of course, the Tories want nothing more than to present Keir Starmer as a friend of the EU who wants open borders. Keir Starmer thinks there are bigger wins to be had by his approach. We'll know soon enough who's right.
Really interesting. Sam, thanks very much for your analysis. Let's get a bit more analysis, shall we, from both Salma and James. I feel like Sam kind of posed as a bit of a question there. You know, is this Keir Starmer being the grown-up in the room, or is he playing into the Conservatives' hands by giving them attack lines? What do you think, first, Salma?
I think he's taken quite an amazing coup with his international tour and turned it into a bit of a problem, because the election is going to be based on what's happening on the streets of the UK. And if you talk to lots of Red Wall MPs in particular, Labour and Conservative, the small boats issue comes up on the doorstep a lot. And I think that the rhetoric and the tone that people are expecting from any leader on this is about toughness. What Keir Starmer is actually offering is a technocratic answer. May well be good, may well be right in terms of processing, but it doesn't feel like he's actually taking charge and dealing with the issue of small boats.
I think Sam was basically right. I mean, he's trying to come up with some policies. They don't quite all hang together. It's a start. It's in policy terms. But it's not a helpful dividing line for Labour and the Tories. I don't think anyone's going to look at his plan and go, well, that's a better worked out version of the government one, even though the government one isn't good. And they do want to fight the election, the Tories, on stop the boats. And this isn't really a plan to stop the boats. You can say we're going to smash the gangs and be really tough, but I mean, that's what the Tories say as well.
But it's actually worse because he's talking about processing quicker, which essentially could mean safe and legal routes where you can apply out of country, which is, again, an increase in migration numbers.
What we should have, but he didn't actually say it.
Well, he hasn't said it, but it is alluded to, and that's opening up a dividing line with the Conservatives as well in terms of the rhetoric. But also, if he's talking about returns, which require a negotiation with the EU is going to expect something back. And could that be migrant quotas?
If you used to advise Jeremy Corbyn, if you were advising Keir Starmer now, would you say, look, just don't talk about immigration, don't talk about the EU, this is losing ground for Labour, just talk about other stuff? Is that the idea?
Generally speaking, I mean, I would say come up with a detailed plan that you can announce, but not with lots of fanfare, not with you in an international trip trying to dominate the day's news agenda. So you've got something to point to when the Tories say, we're going to stop the boats, what are you going to do? And you say, well, we've published our credible, long-term, detailed plan, whatever, and not try to set up the big dividing lines with the Tories, because actually he doesn't. The one dividing line he's got is, I will negotiate a deal with the EU, which is sensible, but it's theoretical. You're going into the election saying, and we'll do this thing which requires other moving parts to improve it, which is quite a hard sell.
At the same time, right, we've been criticising the kind of politics of this, if you like, but Rishi Sunak has promised to stop the boats. He literally stood in front of a lectern with that on it, and the number of boats are going up. So at least Keir Starmer's coming up with a plan. That's got to be a good thing, surely.
Yeah, it does. And, it depends how much Labour actually lean into this. So if they're kind of doubling down and talking about how they're actually going to solve it through these routes or potential deals, then fair enough. But there is a problem for Starmer that he's brought on himself, really, by putting himself front and centre on this, as James just said, which is people are now going to expect him to talk tough when it comes down to smashing the gangs and treating them as terrorists. But he's also going to have to account for the number of migrants that are going to come in an environment where public services are pressured, and whether you agree with that stance or not, where people are very nervous about people coming in through illegal routes or not playing fair by the system. And so I think that's something that Keir Starmer really has to take into consideration.
What do you think Keir Starmer's policy should be when it comes to the EU? Should he hug them close, or should he push them away?
I think he needs to, as he is doing, say we're not going back into the EU and prevents giving the Tories that dividing line. And then I think quietly there's rebuilding relations. But that's a kind of programme for government. I don't think that's the thing that you're pinning to the mast and saying, this is the main thing we're going to do in government. There are loads and loads of things that you could have as big dividing lines where Labour could have big supermajority support. Just earlier this week, Angela Rayner was giving a speech to the TUC for a New Deal for working people. The stuff in that polls really, really well. People really like it. That's a good dividing line. They should make those kind of things the top line message.
Really interesting to talk to both of you on this. Thank you very much indeed. Now, the start of the week was dominated by allegations of a Chinese spy at the heart of Westminster. Astonishing. So it was very timely that today the government published its response to the Intelligence and Security Committee's report from earlier this year. It had been quite critical of what it described as a lack of urgency in government policy. Well, our political correspondent, Ali Fortescue, is here. What exactly has the report been saying then?
So, just to remind people about the first report from the Intelligence and Security Committee, that said that the government's response to the threat from China, as they put it, was inadequate. They said that China is penetrating every part of the UK economy, every sector, as they put it. So it was pretty damning. It's taken quite a long time for the government to respond. Now we have a response. And I'll read you what I think was probably the most interesting bit. There was lots of interesting stuff in there. They say they're taking decisive steps to stop active targeting and recruitment of British individuals with sensitive knowledge and experience, including serving and former military personnel. They also talk about people with sensitive knowledge of Parliament as well. So it's pretty significant. I mean, they're basically saying that China are recruiting, they accept that they're trying to recruit people with sensitive knowledge in the military, in knowledge of Parliament, and they say they're going to strengthen their rules.
It's kind of strange, isn't it? Because part of me thinks this is so shocking. There's a Chinese spy in Parliament. This report is saying this going on all the time. The other half of me is thinking, yeah, that's probably what China's trying to do a lot, isn't it?
Yeah, and I think, the trouble with China, it's quite hard to suss out exactly what they're thinking. It's different from perhaps these sorts of relationships in the past. But as you say, it's obviously very timely because of this arrest, this person that worked as a parliamentary researcher, alleged to have been working as a Chinese spy. So this week we've kind of, seen this focus. How does the government balance the relationship with the second largest economy in the world? How does it balance that developing relationship? We're a long way from the golden era of relations, those cosy shots of Xi Jinping and David Cameron in the pub together. But
I can't believe that happened in some ways. It's true.
But the committee today were saying the government are going at a glacial pace, responding to the government's response to their report. So it's all a bit complicated, but it's a week, basically, where we're talking again about relationship with China and the government being accused still of going at a glacial pace.
Glacial pace, not the pace you want to be going at if you're the government. Thank you very much indeed, Ali, there. Coming up, there you are, coming up on the Politics Hub, we are going to find out who is officially Westminster's top dog.
I'm Martha Kellner and I'm Sky's US correspondent based here in Los Angeles.
It's turning everybody into, a crazy, violent drug addict.
How are you feeling?
I am angry. It is an anti-woman agenda.
2 women say that you paid for their abortions. Are you a hypocrite, sir? Will your candidates win?
I hope so. I think they will. I think they're great candidates.
I gotta be realistic. My sister's dead.
More than 4 weeks on, there's no murder weapon and no suspect. Are you going to catch this killer?
We are doing everything we can.
Ghislaine Maxwell has pleaded not guilty to all 6 charges against her. Mum, how are you feeling today?
Jeffrey said, you answer to Ghislaine, you just don't cross her.
I'm so excited.
Severe nightmares of these people coming in and just taking me in the middle of the night.
I've watched as whole towns were torn apart by natural disaster.
I'm alive and I'm thankful for that, but there are a lot of people who aren't.
It's not the winds people fear most here, it's the water. We take you to the heart of the stories which shape our world. Do you truly believe what you're saying?
A lot of cases that I know are reported from Ukrainian missiles themselves.
Ambassador, with respect, I think that's preposterous.
Hello, welcome back. Now, yesterday we saw Keir Starmer trying out a new nickname for the Prime Minister, Inaction Man. It did get a few laughs in the Commons chamber, which I have to say doesn't usually have a very high bar for jokes. But today, that was escalated by the Leader of the House of Commons, Penny Mordaunt, and a warning, before you hear this, to anyone of a delicate disposition.
But let me rise to the bait and return the serve, because I think the Labour leader is Beach Ken. Beach Ken stands for nothing on shifting sands, in his flip-flops, staring out to sea, doing nothing constructive to stop small boats or grow the economy. And when we examine his weak record on union demands, on border control, on protecting the public and stopping small boats, we discover that, like Beach Ken, he has zero balls.
Let's bring in Salma and James. She's got a bit of form for this, hasn't she, Penny Mordaunt? Did you have a bet once with some people in the constituency that she, could say a swear word in the House of Commons? I'm not going to repeat it on air.
Yeah, she did. She did it, I think, in... I can't remember if it was a maiden speech or maybe opening of Parliament. But, yeah, she does have form on this. And you are totally right. There is a low bar for chuckles in Parliament, and I would go as far as to call it parliamentary humour, which pretty much nobody else gets. I'll give Penny that. She was quite good. I think it was quite funny.
That was at the better end of it. It went on a little bit too long, but yeah, there's a lot of crossover with weird dad humour.
Yeah, dad jokes. It's true. What did you think of Inaction Man?
It's not very good.
No, come on. It's all right. It's all right, but I don't get where the Action Man bit comes from. In order to make that work, Rishi should have done some kind of stunt like that. So, it's weak at the moment, but...
You were both advisors. Did you have to, come up with a few jokes for your, for your bosses?
I had a colleague who came up with a lot of jokes, and generally the job was to not pass them over.
Oh, really? You kind of vetoed them? Yeah. I did recommend that one, but they didn't go for it. I'm really sorry. Was that the general vibe?
Yeah.
How about you?
No, I'd never even attempted. I mean, look, there was such a long preamble to that gag. I just don't think I could waste any time trying to, do the build-up to get a titter in the chamber.
Anyone you think has got a particularly good sense of humour in the House of Commons, or is it all just terrible?
Back in the day, Michael Gove used to be quite good at the gags. But again, parliamentary humour, same goes for William Hague, because I'm old, I remember all that.
Yeah, I'm a bit po-faced. I can't remember any of them being very funny at all.
That's amazing. It's almost... Do they sometimes go into the so bad they're good territory, though?
No. I wouldn't even... maybe for political nerds like us, and you can recall and remember them, but actually, I think I sort of prefer the punch-ups better in the chamber than the attempts at the gags.
Yeah, and they have callbacks on the gags as well, and they don't work. And then also some of them are wrong. I think Rachel Reeves had one which said, "Oh, he's Ted Heath with an Instagram account," and it's like, well, no, but it's not actually Ted Heath; it's his chancellor.
That is a real political
Anthony
nerd
Barber with an
coming
Instagram
out.
account. I mean, the first one doesn't work, and you can't just.
Anthony Barber with it. That's not us really.
I've just deconstructed the joke, and that doesn't work at all. You can't do Stuart Lee in the chamber. That really doesn't work. Maybe
Let's
they should
just
try.
be honest. None of them are getting any awards at Edinburgh for anything they've produced, and I can honestly say nothing that I ever attempted to write in there would have been special either.
Yeah, it's true. It's true. Although I do think Penny Mordaunt, in defence, is definitely the upper end of it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
We'll not too bad. Not too bad. Now, this show has only been going 2 weeks, and I'm already about to break the first rule of television about not working with children or animals. But when we found out that today was a much-anticipated annual contest to decide the Westminster Dog of the Year, it was just too hard to resist.
Beaufort. I named him after the French cheese, which is my favourite cheese. It's a very competitive field, but I'm still not confident. There are just too many variables, too many beautiful dogs.
Registered name is Ty Cadno, Pop the Cork, Poppy to us. I think the government is fully committed to banning electric shock collars, which I think is really important. And also I'd like to see legislation go further, actually, around puppy farms and also tougher sentencing for people who are cruel to animals.
This way, love it, and Anana.
Well, this is Bertie. He's 3 years old. My eldest son's on the autistic spectrum, and he was scared stiff of dogs. This dog's changed his life. I'm not sure we're up to Rebecca's level over there.
You'll never hear MPs drying up about their dogs. They absolutely love them. Oh, it's absolutely incredible. There was an incredibly competitive field, and we get to take this home. It's nearly as big as TJ.
I really wanted to get the winning dog in the studio, but my producers, Mark and Tamara, overruled me. Probably sensibly, to be fair. Probably sensibly.
I would like the dog.
James, you've been really excited about this segment, haven't you?
Yeah, I mean, I know that's sort of meant to be sort of relatable, but you look at that and think those are the people that are actually writing writing the country's laws. I mean, it's fine. People can like their dogs. That's really nice. I don't quite understand. It's like Morris dancers. You see them, you think that's a nice bit of something. I'm not going to do it.
I think James is just a cat person, and that's why he's being very down on the dogs.
I'm not being down on the dogs. Just cats are more dignified. They're not going to. You're not going to get cats having things put on them and,
What, rosettes and
so on.
putting up their paws, jumping through hoops.
They're not going to do that. They're going to, go off and have a nap somewhere. Much more dignified.
Are you a dog person or?
I am a dog person. I love dogs. And actually, I like the Westminster Dog of the Year contest. And I'm going to just be serious for a moment because, Parliament, even though it's all adversarial and, lots of MPs are sort of arguing with each other on various issues, it is a community, and I think it sort of shows that there is a softer side both to the individuals, but also that people can come together and there's interests and things that they can share. I also thought it was very interesting that it does lead to questions about animal cruelty, puppy farms, and things like that. And even if it's just a little bit of fun, it also does point to some important messages.
My favourite ever story about Jeremy Corbyn was when we found out the name of his cat.
El Gato.
Which means?
The cat.
Very original.
This is a great cat. It's a very good cat. He minds his own business. You wouldn't get a rosette on El Gato.
What kind of cat was it?
Didn't you put the cat on Jeremy Corbyn's Christmas card, though?
I definitely didn't.
But
well remembered.
It was a photo of the cat on an IKEA bath mat on an office chair and next to some fire where it looked like El Gato was on fire. It was. I think it's. As a piece of art,
cats, of course, never really pose for anything.
No, the cat was asleep, I think.
Poor cold cat.
Poor cat. I mean, really, he's had his image stolen, part of good cheer. Maybe El Gato didn't want good cheer, I don't know.
I think you should have protested against that.
Thank you very, very much. We've had a very wide-ranging discussion of topics tonight, so thank you very much for both being good sports. Appreciated. Well, that is all for tonight's show. But remember, if you scan the QR code, you can catch up with all of the latest on the Hub throughout the day. It is constantly being updated. Another lively show. That is all for us, but we'll be back Monday, 7 p.m. So see you then.